Do you remember when these mini homes completely took over the internet by storm? With people even telling us that these little units were gonna solve the housing market. Okay, yep, spoilers, they didn't, and although a great concept at first glance, the only solution it seemed they provided was giving wave of corporations,
Spencer Porter here from My Tiny Home Kit Australia,
as well as certain creators, a way to take advantage of people's financial and living desperation by packaging this aesthetically pleasing trend as this golden solution to all their financial stresses. This allowing this new revolutionary product to be marketed and packaged so effectively, it not only scanned millions of people from the quality of the units, yikes, to even straight up stealing countless amounts of deposits and then, well, disappearing. So how was a product that promised freedom, affordability, and innovation end up hurting the very people it was supposed to help? Well, to understand how this trend or product was and is able to be branded so well despite its hidden fundamental flaws, we need to break down those very flaws, from functionality issues, why they don't actually help with the housing market, and how they can actually be a massive financial burden. Understanding these three downsides gives us a far better understanding as how this movement managed to establish itself so effectively, as well as exposing some of the worst scams and financial disasters to come from this trend, which you may have been a victim of yourself without even realizing. A bit of foreshadowing for you. Now, this isn't some takedown of the tiny home concept. These units can work great when those hurdles are taken into account. This is simply a deep dive into a financial trend and how it managed to be so effectively sold as an easy opportunity despite all those downsides, with the first of which being functionality challenges, starting with shipping. See, at first glance, these tiny homes are portrayed as an easy purchase. You click buy and next thing you know, it's at your front door like a normal Amazon impulse buy. But logistically, it's nowhere near as easy as falling in love with that cute little unit you saw some creator show off who only talked about the upfront prices not to ruin the aesthetic of the video. Because the truth is, there are many hidden costs, with the first you'll encounter being transportational costs. So how much are we actually talking about here? Well, finding the delivery cost of your house is actually kind of hard to figure out, and not made intentionally, but because prices will vary very deeply depending on the buyer's location. Even two locations side by side can be completely different when taking into account the terrain and flatness of your property. So to get a ballpark figure, I contacted multiple tiny home companies across my country using a mix of different locations. And on average, for an 8-meter unit, I found a distance of 100 Ks can cost between $2,000 to $3,000, with 500 Ks nearing $6,000. However, costs can skyrocket far above $10,000 in remote areas, and this is considering no other additional equipment is needed to access the property. Once we do have a unit though, we're met with our next hidden expense, which is plumbing and power, which of course isn't going to be as thoroughly explored as much online. And as expected, a video talking about architectural designs is going to do a lot better than a video exploring pipework and solar inverters. Sorry to all my solar fans. So people have to dig a lot deeper than their surface level algorithm to understand these extra costs, which is why we see so many stories from people regretting their units from these unexpected expenses. So how much are we actually talking about here? Well, on average, upwards of $5,000 for plumbing and around another $6,000 for a 1 to 2 kilowatt power system. Now, of course, this price will vary quite a fair bit depending on your country or even your state. I mean, for instance, my American subscribers might pay one rate while my one lone Swedish subscriber, shout out to you, Sweden, might end up paying far more, probably from that sauna hookup. But these hidden expenses aren't the only functionality issues with these tiny homes. More importantly, we have lifestyle challenges. You see, these tiny homes can be, well, small. Like very small. Better. And sometimes people completely overlook this aspect because they simply fall in love with the style, thinking the lack of space is just a part of the minimalist experience. Unfortunately, as the novelty wears off, your new 90-year-old posture doesn't, with many people even complaining they find themselves in situations where they struggle to store belongings, fit basic hobbies in, and even maintain relationships, as well as experiencing poor insulation. All these compromising people's mental and physical health. These only few examples showcasing the many dilemmas to take into account when actually living in these units, which many people unfortunately simply don't anticipate. And it's because of these missed downsides that allow many different types of scams to thrive from this trend, which preys on the romanticized version of it instead of its reality, with the first type of scam we're going to look at being fraudulent businesses, where legal businesses are created to give themselves credibility only to use that image to scam individuals, causing catastrophic financial losses. A popular example coming from Australia with a very satisfying ending, which started with when Spencer Porter created his sixth business, My Tiny Home Kit, promising to deliver these tiny home units.
Here at My Tiny Home Kit Australia, we have an opportunity like nowhere else.
A promise that saw him reportedly collect hundreds of down payments totaling over $5 million from retirees to younger people looking for a housing alternative. But one by one, these people were met with complete radio silence, even leaving some homeless, according to some reports. Fortunately enough though, enough people came together to put his business in the spotlight, where the government eventually stepped in and shut down his operation, forcing him to pay millions of dollars back with his criminal charges pending as of recording. Unfortunately, this story isn't very unique. We've also seen $15 million stolen from Californians, with people taking out loans worth $300,000 to acquire these units. However, the only thing they would acquire would be their names in the news.
Showing they lost more than $15 million. A company called Multitasker got the money, but in nearly all cases, never built the homes.
This highlighting the clear importance of acquiring legitimate inspections before putting your money down, and this only being the first type of scam that this video covers, with the two later on being far more common. But before we look into those, we now have our second major downside that these units bring: not actually changing the housing market. See, these units were sold as a stress-free solution to an increasingly chaotic housing crisis. However, one hurdle has made owning these units in some cases far more complicated than owning a full-size home, which are licensing and zoning laws. And this is all because tiny homes as a product are still a relatively new concept, meaning many countries don't really know how to classify them. Are they legally a house, a caravan, or a new type of permanent structure? Well, apparently no one can really agree. This ambiguity leading to authorities quite often over-regulating them or even outright banning them, meaning these extra regulations can end up costing, in some cases, $30,000, as people can quite often need new development applications, site surveys, inspections, natural disasters assessments, and insurances, just to name a few. Completely desensitizing people looking to get their own units. And to add complexity to the issue, each country can have completely different sets of regulations depending on the state you reside in, leading to more confusion and fueling stories such as this man believing he had built his own tiny home on his friend's property based on state legislation, only to be told to remove the unit or face a small $1 million fine after there was some confusion in terms as to what the home constituted as. And it's actually because of these exact types of complications that make this next scam we're going to look at far more detectable, but still very dangerous, which are engagement-based giveaways. Now, these scams are a bit more unique, as they, in most cases, are not made by real tiny home businesses looking for deposits, although I wouldn't call the other scams real businesses anyways. Instead, they use fake giveaways as a way to gather people's information to then sell off. The reason most of these are obvious scams is because you realize how impractical the details are when you look at all the licensing hurdles they would need to pass, all from transportational and setup costs we've talked about earlier, and that's even ignoring all the different types of laws from each different country that they would have to deal with. The logistics just don't add up with these guys. And these types of scams are quite common all throughout the internet, but are quite prominent with tiny homes, as they use emotional triggers to lure people in from their trending nature to selling this affordable dream seen as this new modernized path to financial freedom. For instance, this fake competition in Australia promising the winner a tiny home, which saw 120,000 people give away their details, but when the picture was reverse engineered, could see the image belonged to a company all the way in Canada that never once operated in Australia. Or this scam that saw their post shared over 100,000 times by people in the US, only for the scammers to have used a picture from a New Zealand company, which would be a bit of a drive. So what can be done to avoid these scams? Well, simply clicking on their links to see the legitimateness of their website, if there even is one, or reverse engineering their pictures can give a very good sense of the legitimacy of these posts. Unfortunately, the worst scam to come out of this trend, and the reason I decided to make this video, is one that can't actually be reverse engineered until it's too late. A practice that almost everyone online has been affected by, and one I'm sure you've also come across yourself without even realizing it. This ranks in countless amounts of dollars, which we'll check out shortly. But talking of money first, this leads us to the biggest hurdle as to why these units don't help with the housing market. And that is, unlike normal homes, getting a mortgage and help from the bank can be far trickier, even with the smaller loan size, as these despite smaller financial commitments, can carry far more risk for banks. The first coming from the legality grey area, where because in many areas these units are not seen as real property, a mortgage is simply not possible or requires far many more hurdles to jump through. And the second one and biggest risk these banks see is that there's just no collateral. See, just because you buy one of these doesn't mean you necessarily buy the land it sits on. So if you do default on the loan, the bank has no real asset it can use as collateral. But what if you do buy the land and now you have a purchase that is augmenting in value from an increasingly rising housing market, right? Well, unfortunately not, until you realize that these units don't financially act as real homes and will very often depreciate in value and depreciate very quickly. In some cases, 30% in the first year, just like we see with cars, which always make for a great investment. It's through all these indirect hidden layers that we start to see how these homes are increasingly less likely to be a solution to the housing market. And we haven't even looked at the direct cost of these units yet, which brings us to the last downside these hurdles can bring, which are the direct financial implications. Now, this doesn't have to be the case, and these units can work great for you. However, a lack of research and taking this trend at face value on social media, while ignoring all the legal and logistical costs, can really put you in a world of hurt. And even if you were to bypass all these hurdles, even the simple outright cost of these units can be very, very misleading online, with websites showcasing beautiful already set up homes, only to hide the fact that these costs only covers the skeleton of the unit, excluding the furniture, shipping, and setup costs. It's only when you start adding all those up that you start to see the real price of these units. For instance, if we look at this 9-meter long unit, we can expect a more accurate cost of $120,000, which at this point most people would rather spend on a home deposit. And it's with this realization that people make the biggest mistake, to try and cut corners, such as trying to build the home themselves with no deep construction experience. This leading to disastrous results, or having to start certain steps over and over again, only resulting in a more expensive unit and worse than the original design. So at this point, it's become quite apparent that these units have not been the saving grace first home buyers needed. But what about already established homeowners with the hope to be able to quickly transform a piece of their land to generate passive income and rent out their unit? And this once again comes with very unique financial downsides that are not easily spotted at first sight, such as the lack of insurance, as these units can be hard to constitute as a home, and because they may not be seen as a formal dwelling, tenants may struggle to be legally protected. A bit of a issue there, as well as the owners, which may come into disagreements on who claims responsibilities for repairs, waste, and so forth. However, there is one demographic that has clearly benefited from this movement, which brings us to the final and in many ways the most frustrating scam to come out of this tiny home movement, and one that quietly benefits those behind it before you even realize it. See, it's no lie that the housing market has and is taking its toll on the general public. And as much as people want to believe that there can be a straightforward solution, the truth is this is a systematic problem and not a design problem. No design, no matter how good or appealing, can outright fix a system that has seen Australia, for instance, become the first country with houses reaching an average of $1 million, with many countries expecting to follow suit. And it's with this desperation that this next type of scam has become increasingly prominent, and that is fake content selling this lie. And the reason this to me is one of the worst scams is because by the time you look up their claims to disprove them, unlike other scams we've mentioned earlier, these channels have already benefited from your click and retention. And by no means are these channels the only types to try and sell a fantasy for a profit. We see a lot of this in the financial niche, with people trying to sell the public courses or unrealistic dreams to make easy money, in most cases by teaching you how to sell, well, your own course. Great. And just like these changes, they fail to mention the complexity of, well, reality. In our case, the council struggles and hidden expenses, all in order to exploit the cost of living crisis and sell this fantasy, all by showcasing that you can avoid a mortgage, live off the grid, and not have to deal with landlords, spurring people to commit to this investment, which can often and quickly lead to financial horror stories when not enough research has been done. But unlike financial channels trying to scam their audience by selling courses, these channels don't sell mini homes. So what financial incentives do these channels have to make these videos? Well, the obvious one comes from ads from well-performing videos. Videos advertising straight up lies designed to get clicks with no regard and at the expense of truth and research, such as this video claiming Tesla jumped onto the tiny home bandwagon, or even claiming that these tiny homes sell for $10,000. And even if you instantly realize these videos are complete BS, they've already benefited from your click, boosting the algorithm, or even potentially having an ad play before the video, which adds up and ranks in thousands of dollars from accumulating hundreds of thousands of views from deceptive and optimistic viewers, such as this video right here, which presumably made over $10,000 from being in a high CPM niche, and that's being conservative. And you would think this $10,000 home would be the central point of these videos, but when we click on them, all we're met with are AI voiceovers with some B footage dragging on irrelevant topics.
The trend of tiny houses started roughly a decade ago. Its popularity has continued to grow, especially as many people want a mobile living space or are looking to scale back on their house's footprint.
All this to hide the fact that these videos are, well, lying to you while simultaneously trying to optimize their retention with the hopes people will click on their affiliate links. Which is a second way these guys make money. And I'm not going to explain the concept in detail, but ultimately these guys get a percentage of whatever is sold through these links. And with products in the 20 and 30 thousands of dollars, they only need a few gullible people from the millions of viewers they get to purchase one of these units, leading us to the last factor that make these channels so dangerous is that these videos are very, very, very easy to make and accumulate views, especially when you just make up random information to get clicks with no time allocated to research, such as, well, these videos, which also require very little scripting time, as you can just copy and paste a script straight from ChatGPT and then edit it all very quickly by shoving footage side by side. So to counter this, I've included a few channels that I found very interesting when making this video that dives more into this tiny home concept a bit more deeply, such as Wicked Life, which shows the reality of living in a tiny house. Christina Smallhorn, who has more of a real estate approach, helping her viewers avoid getting tricked by scammy practices, and Living in a Big Tiny House, which explores multiple tiny homes while being very transparent about the units. Now, the good news, like what a lot of these channels claim, are that these tiny homes as a product are great and can be used as a great practical purchase when thorough research has been conducted. Unfortunately, though, this trend has been completely sucked dry by businesses and channels trying to take advantage of people's desperation by suppressing the many explored downsides. But downsides which can be easily highlighted and bypassed with the right tools, and not to take anything for face value, especially in the financial world or on social media. Another prime example being the bankrupted buy now, pay later scheme, which if you want to hear more about or more videos dissecting more of these financial movements, don't forget to subscribe. But that's it. Hope you enjoyed.